Ben McKee, Rob Lewis, Volquest.com here, previewing Tennessee's linebackers. And Rob, there are a couple of newcomers to discuss, but for the most part, it's the same two in the middle this season: Aaron Beasley, Jeremy Banks.
And Jeremy, not perfect by any means, but Jeremy Banks, as the year went on, was ultra productive. I mean, finished with 124 tackles, led the team in that department, led the team with 11.5 tackles for loss, tied for the team lead with 5.5 sacks. So, I mean, this is a guy that suddenly you look around. I mean, he's played a lot of football at a position where not a lot of people have on this roster.
Right, and I'm really intrigued to see just how big of a step or what kind of step, I guess, Jeremy does take. Obviously, you'd like to reel in the penalties that he committed last year, some unnecessary penalties there that really cost Tennessee at times. But how big of a step can he take? How big of a step can Aaron Beasley take? Because if those two guys can take a step, it could be huge for this defense.
I think you can expect everybody to take a step forward just for being in the same system for 2 years in a row. And I think even more so because you're talking about in Banks and Beasley, guys who they're veterans, have been around a while, but had not played a lot of football before last year. And because of that, I feel like, I'm not saying they're going to take an exponential leap, but I think you can expect both of them to be more productive, more comfortable, more set in the system. And for me, I don't know if there was a more surprising guy on the roster last year than Beasley. I mean, not that he was, all SEC caliber or whatever, but he held his own to a degree that I did not think he was capable of.
And there's not really a newcomer outside of Elijah Herring, but in a way, Jawan Mitchell is a newcomer because he barely played, if at all, last season. I think he's without a doubt the X factor to this room. What can he provide? And I think anything is kind of like a cherry on top at this point.
You stole my phrase. I was going to go X factor, so I'll go wild card with Jawan Mitchell because, I mean, if you just look at his pedigree, he's probably got a better pedigree than either Banks or Beasley, at least before last year, before Jeremy did what he did last year. And, I think if you can get him to play at the level that he showed at Texas 2 years ago, then you add a legitimate, third guy to the mix there, and maybe somebody that even pushes for a starting spot.
Yeah, and I think another guy that could push for serious playing time, maybe not a starting spot, but is Elijah Herring. Austin and Brent had a note in the war room a couple weeks ago that his weight's up to 233. That's obviously a great sign, and I think he's had a really good spring.
And if you just go out here and you're just watching the linebackers, you go through drills, Elijah Herring looks like an SEC linebacker. You look at Banks, you look at Beasley. Beasley still doesn't quite look like an SEC linebacker to me. I know he gets by and has made it happen, but Elijah Herring looks the part. Now, how quick mentally can he get up to speed? How quickly does the game slow down for him? It's a question that every single freshman from the dawn of time has faced in the SEC. But Herring is a guy that clearly looks like, if it's not now, he certainly has a bright future.
And I don't know about you, Rob, but I think it's imperative that this inside linebacker group really leads the defense. Last year you could lean on Matthew Butler, you could lean on Alontae Taylor, Theo Jackson, but this year it's got to be those inside linebackers.
Especially in the front seven. You look around and Omari Thomas is your most experienced guy coming back up front. And Omari's, started a few games last year, but it's not exactly like he's I wouldn't describe him as a cagey veteran. I think that, Jeremy Banks can fill that role. And you mentioned he's got to be a guy you can trust on the field. Your leader, can't be somebody that accumulates 30, 45 yards of penalties on, post whistle flags. But yeah, the front seven, you just mentioned Matthew Butler. There's not a guy like that in that front seven. And I think it's really imperative that Jeremy Banks steps up and kind of fills those shoes.
And lastly, I think it's also really imperative that they find a way to stay healthy. I know part of that is kind of luck, but in addition to Solon Page, I mean, those are your 4 to 5 guys right there, and Elijah Herring doesn't have any experience right now.
No, and that's a spot where, injuries happen. You're getting your ankles cut. You're fighting guys off below your knees all the time. You're in the scrum a lot. So, yeah, it's a thin position. You talked about 3 guys off the Salon in there. He played quite a bit last year, but you got 4 guys that have really been through the wars if you count Mitchell's experience at Texas, and beyond that, lots of question marks.
Absolutely. He's Rob Lewis. I'm Ben McKee.